Inside this envelope is something that will change your laughter forever. The wife arrived at the hotel where her husband and his mistress were laughing, but she carried a sealed envelope. Caroline Reed was standing in front of the door to Suite 1805 at the Empire Grand Hotel, holding a sealed manila envelope in her right hand. Her heart was pounding, but her face remained serene, almost cold. Behind that door were the two people who had destroyed her life, her husband, Ryan, and his mistress, Brooke. She could hear their laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft music in the background. She knocked on the door once. The laughter stopped. There was a tense silence. Then, Ryan's carefree voice asked from inside, "Room service?" Caroline took a deep breath and answered in a voice as cold as ice. Something like that. When that door opened, nothing would ever be the same again. But before we find out how Caroline arrived at that moment, in front of that door with the envelope that would change everything, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to the moment she still believed her life was perfect, back when she still trusted the man who slept beside her every night. Hey, before we continue with this story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, in Mexico, in Spain, or some other country? Leave us a comment below telling us where you follow us from, because we love reading your comments and knowing our narrated stories reach so many places. Now, let's continue with Caroline's story. Caroline Reed woke up every morning in her luxury apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan with the absolute certainty that she had built a perfect life. The sun streamed through the enormous windows of the 12th floor apartment, illuminating the modern furniture she had chosen with such care. At 39, Caroline was a senior financial consultant at Reed Global, a firm she had helped build from the ground up alongside Ryan, her husband. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of building an empire together, 12 years of believing that love and loyalty were the foundations of everything they had. Every morning followed the same routine. She would get up at 6 a.m., make coffee for both of them, check her emails while Ryan showered, and then they would have breakfast together before heading to the office. Sometimes, when the New York City traffic got heavy, they would share a car and discuss the day's projects. Ryan was an executive, charismatic, always with a ready smile and a kind word for everyone. People admired him. Caroline admired him too, or at least, she thought she did. The company they had built together was their shared pride. Reed Global had become a respected firm in the corporate world, managing multi-million-dollar investments and advising major corporations. Caroline was the mind behind the financial strategies, the one who checked every number, who ensured everything was in order. Ryan was the public face, the one who closed deals, the one who impressed clients with his charm. They were the perfect team, or so it seemed. But the cracks in that perfection began to appear so subtly that Caroline initially ignored them. It was in March when Ryan casually mentioned a business trip to Boston, an important corporate meeting, he told her. Caroline didn't think much of it. Work trips were common. However, days later, while reviewing the official company schedule as she always did, she noticed there was no meeting scheduled in Boston for those dates. It seemed odd, but when she asked Ryan, he replied with a calm smile that it had been a last-minute thing, an opportunity that had come up unexpectedly. Caroline nodded and let it go. She trusted him. Why wouldn't she? Then came the late-night texts. Caroline would wake up at midnight and see the light from Ryan's phone illuminating the room. He would be sitting up in bed, typing with an intense concentration he only showed when something was important. When she asked who it was, Ryan would say it was a client from Europe, that due to the time difference, he had to reply right away. Caroline would go back to sleep, but a small alarm had gone off in her head. Something didn't add up. The phone calls changed too. Before, Ryan would answer his phone in front of her without a problem. Now, when his cell rang, he would leave the room, close the door to his home office, and speak in a low voice. Caroline could sometimes overhear laughter, that soft tone he used when he wanted to be charming. When he finished and returned, Caroline would ask who it was. Always the same answer: a client, a partner, an investor. But the nervous smiles that accompanied those answers said something else. One afternoon in April, Caroline was in the office reviewing the corporate account statements, something she did religiously every month to make sure everything was in order. It was her job, her responsibility, and she took it very seriously. As she scanned line by line, her eyes stopped on an unusual charge: a reservation at the Empire Grand Hotel in Manhattan, paid with Ryan's corporate card. The amount wasn't exorbitant, but it was high enough for a luxury suite. The date of the charge coincided exactly with one of those supposed business trips Ryan had mentioned. Caroline's heart began to race. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the report. A hotel in Manhattan? But Ryan had told her he was in Boston. Why would he book a hotel in the same city where they lived? Her mind started racing, searching for logical explanations. Maybe it was for a client. Maybe it was for a last-minute meeting. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself, something deep inside told her this was not normal. Caroline closed the report and took a deep breath. She needed to calm down. She needed to think clearly. Before jumping to conclusions, she needed more information. She decided not to confront Ryan yet. If there was one thing Caroline had learned in her career as a financial consultant, it was that important decisions were never made based on emotion. They were made with data, with proof, with hard facts. Over the next few weeks, Caroline became a silent observer of her own life. She started noticing things that had previously gone unnoticed, small things that, together, formed a disturbing pattern. At the office, Caroline began paying attention to Brooke Miller, the 3-4-year-old communications advisor who worked on their floor. Brooke was attractive, self-assured, always impeccably dressed. Caroline had never paid her much attention before, but now she started to notice the way Brooke looked at Ryan during meetings. It wasn't a professional gaze, it was something more. Her eyes lingered on him for a second too long. When Ryan spoke, Brooke would lean forward as if she didn't want to miss a single word. And when she passed him documents, their hands would brush in a way that seemed too casual to be accidental. Caroline saw it all from her seat at the conference table, her stomach in knots, but she maintained a neutral expression on her face. The worst part came when Caroline started noticing the laughter. Brooke laughed too loudly at Ryan's jokes, even when they weren't funny, and Ryan seemed to enjoy it. He liked making her laugh, he liked having her attention. Caroline watched these interactions with a mixture of pain and contained rage, but she never said anything. Not yet. She needed to be sure. But what truly confirmed Caroline's suspicions was the perfume. One evening, when Ryan came home from work, Caroline leaned in to give him a welcome kiss, and there it was, that sweet, floral scent that was definitely not hers. It was the same scent Brooke wore. Caroline had noticed it before in the office hallways when Brooke would walk past her with those fake smiles and hypocritical hugs, asking how her marriage was, telling her Ryan was a wonderful man, that she was so lucky. Caroline felt something inside her shatter that evening. The perfume on Ryan's shirt couldn't be a coincidence. The looks in the office couldn't be a coincidence. The mysterious trips and whispered calls couldn't be a coincidence. It was all connected. Her husband was cheating on her, and the woman he was cheating with was someone she saw every day, someone who pretended to be friendly, someone who was probably laughing at her behind her back. But Caroline didn't confront Ryan that night. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't demand explanations. She simply smiled, asked him how his day had been, and they had dinner together as if nothing had happened. Because Caroline had already made a decision. If her husband was betraying her, she needed solid proof. She needed to be completely sure before she acted. And when she finally did act, she would do it in a way he would never forget. The night that changed everything came in May. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Ryan left home early, telling Caroline he had a business dinner with potential investors. He gave her a kiss on the cheek, wished her a good day, and left. Caroline stayed home, working from her personal office, reviewing reports and answering emails. But around 8 p.m., something made her pick up the phone and call the office. The receptionist answered with her usual friendly voice. Caroline asked if she could confirm the details of the investor dinner Ryan had mentioned. There was an awkward silence on the other end of the line. Then the receptionist replied with some confusion that there was no dinner scheduled on the agenda for that night. In fact, there were no corporate events at all. Caroline felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. She hung up the phone with trembling hands. Ryan had lied. There was no business dinner. So where was he? Who was he with? Caroline already knew the answer, but she needed to confirm it. She opened her laptop with fingers that could barely type and accessed the company's corporate reservation system. As a senior consultant, she had full access. She searched for Ryan's name in the system, and there it was, like a slap in the face. Suite 1805, Empire Grand Hotel, reserved in the name of Ryan Reed, for that very night. Caroline stared at the screen for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The computer light illuminated her face in the darkness of the office. She didn't cry. Maybe she should have. Maybe a part of her wanted to scream, to break things, to call Ryan and demand an explanation. But instead, Caroline simply closed the laptop with slow, deliberate movements. She got up from her chair, walked to her apartment window, and looked out at the lights of Manhattan glittering in the night. Her mind was no longer thinking about the pain of betrayal, it was thinking about strategy. If Ryan had underestimated her, if he had thought he could cheat without consequences, he was about to learn a very painful lesson. Caroline was not a woman who reacted with uncontrolled emotions. She was a financial consultant who solved problems with data, with analysis, with strategy. And now, her unfaithful husband had become her most urgent problem, a problem she would solve with the same surgical precision she used to manage multi-million-dollar accounts. Caroline turned around and went back to her laptop. She opened it again and began taking notes, dates, places, amounts. Every suspicious charge on the corporate cards, every trip that didn't align with the official schedule, every inconsistency. If she was going to destroy Ryan, she would do it the right way, with irrefutable proof, with complete documentation, with a plan so well executed that he would have no way to escape. That night, while Ryan was at the Empire Grand with Brooke probably laughing, making toasts, enjoying their secret romance, Caroline was at home, building the case that would end his career, his marriage, and his reputation. And she would do it with a smile on her face. Because Caroline Reed had just discovered something about herself she had never known before. When betrayed, she didn't fall apart. She became dangerous. The next day, Caroline acted as if nothing had happened. When Ryan came home close to midnight with that guilty smile and a prepared excuse about how the dinner had run longer than planned, Caroline simply nodded, asked him how it went, offered him a glass of water, and went to bed. Ryan probably thought he had gotten away with it again. He didn't know that his wife had already begun building his professional tomb, brick by brick, document by document, proof by proof. And so, while Ryan slept soundly that night, believing his secret was still a secret, Caroline lay awake in the dark, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, planning every move of her next play. Because this wasn't just a story of infidelity. It was a story of justice, and Caroline Reed was about to become the judge, jury, and executioner of her own verdict. The morning after discovering the hotel reservation, Caroline woke with a determination she didn't recognize in herself. She hadn't slept well. In fact, she had barely closed her eyes. But as the sun began to filter through her bedroom curtains, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, with her phone in hand, looking for the number of a private investigator a colleague had recommended years ago. She never thought she would have to use that contact. She never imagined her life would come to this. But here she was, dialing the number at 6:30 the morning, hoping someone would answer. The investigator's name was Jack Callahan, a man with a deep, professional voice who asked no unnecessary questions. Caroline explained the situation with a coldness that surprised even herself. She needed photographic evidence of Ryan's visits to the Empire Grand Hotel. She needed dates, times, and, if possible, the identity of the person he was meeting. Jack told her he understood perfectly and that he would have a preliminary report in 3 days. Caroline hung up and stared at her bedroom wall, feeling a strange emptiness in her chest. She had just hired someone to confirm that her marriage was a lie, but there was no turning back. For the next few days, Caroline acted with a normality that bordered on unsettling. She arrived at the office at the usual time, greeted Ryan with a kiss on the cheek, reviewed documents, attended meetings. No one noticed anything strange, not even Ryan, who continued to act like the attentive husband, asking how her day was, if she needed help with any projects. Caroline would smile and respond with the same warmth as always, but inside, she felt like she was playing a role in a play she had never rehearsed. On Tuesday of that week, Caroline saw Brooke in the office hallway. As always, Brooke approached with that bright, fake smile, asking how she was, telling her she looked tired, asking if everything was okay at home. Caroline had to make a superhuman effort not to scream the truth at her right then. Instead, she just smiled and said that everything was perfect. She had just been busy with work lately. Brooke nodded sympathetically and walked down the hall, swaying her hips in a way that Caroline now understood was not accidental. Everything about that woman was calculated. It was all a performance designed to seduce and destroy. On Thursday afternoon, Jack Callahan sent Caroline a message. He had something. She left the office early, feigning a doctor's appointment, and met him at a discreet cafe in the West Village. Jack handed her a thick manila folder. Caroline opened it with hands that trembled slightly, though she tried to maintain her composure. The first photos were from the previous Monday. Ryan entering the Empire Grand Hotel at 7 p.m., alone. Then, 10 minutes later, Brooke entering through the same door, looking around, as if to make sure no one saw her. More photos showed them both in the lobby, walking toward the elevators. And then the image that made Caroline's stomach churn. Ryan and Brooke kissing inside the elevator, their hands intertwined, their bodies pressed together like infatuated teenagers. Caroline closed the folder and took a deep breath. Jack watched her in silence, probably used to these reactions. He asked if she wanted him to continue surveillance. Caroline nodded without hesitation. She needed more. She needed a complete record of every meeting, every lie, every stolen moment they thought was a secret. Jack said he understood and would keep working. Caroline paid the cafe bill, put the folder in her designer handbag, and walked out onto the street, feeling like she was walking in an alternate reality. That night, when Ryan got home, Caroline was waiting for him in the living room with a glass of wine. He was surprised to see her there, relaxed and smiling. He asked if everything was all right. Caroline said yes, she just wanted to unwind a bit. They had dinner together as always, talking about trivial things, the weather, a story they'd seen on the news. Ryan seemed calm, even happy. And Caroline wondered how it was possible for this man to act so naturally, as if he weren't living a double life, as if he weren't destroying everything they had built together. Over the next 2 weeks, Jack sent her more photos. Every encounter documented, every lie exposed. Ryan and Brooke met on Tuesdays and Thursdays without fail. Always the same sweet, always the same knowing smiles. In some photos, Caroline could see Brooke laughing, throwing her head back, touching Ryan's arm with the familiarity that only comes from intimacy. And Ryan would look at her with an expression Caroline hadn't seen in years, an expression of desire, of fascination, of something dangerously close to love. But while Caroline was accumulating evidence of infidelity, something else started to catch her attention. One afternoon, while reviewing the company's financial statements with more detail than usual, she noticed something odd. There were transfers she didn't recognize, significant amounts leaving the corporate accounts for destinations not registered in the official books. At first, she thought it might be an accounting error, but when she started tracing the origin of these transfers, they all bore Ryan's digital signature. Caroline felt the floor shift beneath her feet. She opened more files, reviewed more documents, and with every page she read, the picture became clearer and more terrifying. Ryan wasn't just cheating on her with another woman. He was stealing from the company. Thousands, tens of thousands of dollars siphoned off to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Fake invoices from non-existent suppliers. Inflated contracts where the price difference disappeared somewhere in the system. All signed by him. All authorized under his name. Caroline printed every document, every record, every suspicious transfer. She kept them in a separate folder from the photos of the affair. Because now, this wasn't just a broken marriage. This was corporate fraud. This was illegal. And if someone discovered this before she could manage it, Reed Global could collapse, taking Caroline's reputation down with it. She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let Ryan destroy everything she had worked for. For the next few days, Caroline barely slept. Her mind was constantly working, analyzing every detail, every suspicious movement in the accounts. She calculated that Ryan had embezzled around $250,000 over the last 18 months. It wasn't an amount that would bankrupt the company, but it was enough to be a serious felony, enough to ruin his career, enough for him to face criminal charges if the authorities found out. One night, Caroline found herself sitting on her bathroom floor with all the documents spread around her, the photos of Ryan and Brooke kissing, the financial records showing the systematic theft, the emails where Ryan authorized suspicious payments. It was all there, like pieces of a puzzle, forming the image of a man she didn't recognize. The man she had married, the man who had promised her eternal love, the man who had been her partner in everything, had never really existed. Or maybe he did once, but he had died somewhere in these 12 years, replaced by this stranger who lied, stole, and betrayed without the slightest remorse. The tears began to fall. Caroline tried to hold them back, but she couldn't. She let herself collapse against the bathroom wall and cried with an intensity she hadn't felt since she was a child. She cried for the marriage she had lost. She cried for the trust that had been destroyed. She cried for the years invested in a man who had never truly valued her. And she cried for herself, for the woman who had been so naive, so trusting, so blind to the signs that were probably always there. She didn't know how long she sat there, crying on her bathroom floor. Maybe it was minutes, maybe hours. But eventually, the tears dried up, and when they did, something inside Caroline shifted. She got up from the floor, looked at herself in the mirror, and saw a different woman. She was no longer the naive wife who trusted blindly. She was no longer the business partner who believed in teamwork. She was a betrayed woman who had just discovered she held all the power in her hands. Because she had the proof, she had the documents, she had the evidence that could destroy Ryan completely. The next day, Caroline got up earlier than ever. She showered, dressed in her most elegant suit, and applied her makeup with care. When she looked in the mirror before leaving, she saw a woman in control, a woman with a plan. She arrived at the office before anyone else and started to work. She scanned all the compromising financial documents, organized the photos of the affair in chronological order. She prepared a detailed report of every irregularity she had found. And then she did something she knew would change everything. She requested a private meeting with the key members of the board of directors. The meeting took place 2 days later in a discreet conference room outside the main offices. 3 board members attended. Mr. Thompson, a veteran investor in his late 60s who had been with the company from the beginning, Mrs. Chen, a brilliant corporate lawyer who handled all legal matters, and Dr. Reyes, an economic consultant who oversaw high-level finances. Caroline thanked them for coming and, without beating around the bush, showed them everything she had discovered. The silence in that room was absolute as the 3 board members reviewed the documents. Caroline watched their faces shift from confusion to surprise and then to horror. Mr. Thompson was the first to speak, his voice trembling with contained rage. He asked how long Caroline had known about this. She answered honestly, "About 3 weeks, Mrs." Chen wanted to know if Ryan was aware that she knew. Caroline shook her head. No one knew. Not even Ryan suspected that his wife had uncovered his double betrayal. Dr. Reyes asked what Caroline wanted to do, and that's when she revealed her true plan. She wanted Ryan removed immediately from his position as CEO. She wanted all his shares in the company transferred to her name as compensation for the damages, and she wanted legal proceedings initiated against him for corporate fraud. But there was one condition. Caroline wanted to be the one to deliver the news personally. She wanted to see his face when he realized he had lost everything. The 3 board members looked at each other. There was a brief discussion about the legalities, about how to handle this without creating a public scandal that could damage the company's reputation. Mrs. Chen suggested that if they managed it correctly, they could present it as a corporate restructuring, with Caroline taking full control while Ryan retired for personal reasons. The legal details would be handled privately to avoid negative publicity. Mr. Thompson agreed, but added that Ryan had to face legal consequences eventually. They couldn't let someone steal from the company and get away with it. Dr. Reyes suggested they first recover the embezzled funds and then decide how to proceed legally. Caroline agreed with everything. What mattered most to her at that moment was that Ryan knew he had been discovered and that he would lose everything he had lied and stolen for. The meeting ended with a unanimous agreement. Caroline would have the full support of the board. The share transfer documents would be prepared immediately. The termination letter would be drafted that afternoon. And Caroline would have the privilege of delivering it all personally. But she asked for one more favor. She wanted to wait for the perfect moment. She wanted Ryan to be at his most vulnerable, most confident, most certain that his secret was safe. And that moment, Caroline knew, would be during one of his trysts with Brooke at the Empire Grand Hotel. Jack Callahan confirmed a few days later that Ryan had once again booked Suite 1805 for the following Friday. Caroline smiled when she received the information. Perfect. She would have everything ready for that night. The documents would be signed, the envelope would be sealed, and she would walk down that hotel hallway, not as a broken, cheated wife, but as the woman who was about to reclaim everything that belonged to her. The week leading up to that Friday, Caroline acted as if nothing had changed. She had dinner with Ryan, asked about his day, they even made love one night, and Caroline had to restrain herself from vomiting in disgust as he touched her, knowing those same hands had been on Brooke's body before. But she kept up the act, because every passing day was a day closer to her victory. On Thursday night, Caroline received the manila envelope with all the official documents, the termination letter, the share transfer agreement, the complete audit report signed by the board of directors. It was all there, sealed, waiting to be delivered. Caroline put it in her purse and slept peacefully that night, knowing that the next day, everything would change forever. On Friday night, Caroline prepared for what would be the most important moment of her life. She took a long shower, letting the hot water relax every muscle in her body. She dried herself carefully and looked in the bathroom mirror. She was no longer the same woman who had discovered the betrayal weeks ago. This was a new version, stronger, more dangerous. She applied her makeup with precision, every stroke calculated, red lips, perfect eyeliner, a flawless appearance. She wasn't going to show up at that hotel as a devastated wife. She was going as the powerful executive she was, as the woman who was about to take back everything that belonged to her. She chose an elegant black cashmere coat that fell to her knees, high heels that echoed with every step, and her designer handbag, where she placed the sealed manila envelope. That envelope contained the end of Ryan's world, but also the beginning of her own liberation. Before leaving, Caroline took one last look in the foyer mirror. She took a deep breath and told herself, "This isn't revenge, this is justice." At 9:47 p.m., the taxi pulled up in front of the Empire Grand Hotel. The building's lights shone against the dark Manhattan sky. Caroline paid the driver, got out, and walked toward the main entrance with firm, decisive steps. The doorman opened the door with a polite bow. She gave a slight nod and entered the hotel's luxurious lobby. The marble floor gleamed under enormous crystal chandeliers. A few people were seated on the reception sofas, but Caroline paid them no mind. Her gaze was fixed on the front desk. The young clerk behind the counter, a boy no older than 25 inches, an impeccable suit, and a professional smile, looked up as Caroline approached. His smile froze when he recognized her. Caroline could see the discomfort in his eyes. He had probably seen Ryan arrive with Brooke multiple times. He probably knew exactly what was happening in Suite 1805. And now the rightful wife was standing before him, elegant and serene, asking for access to that very suite. Caroline stopped at the counter and smiled with a calm that contrasted with the obvious panic on the clerk's face. In a clear, firm voice, she said, "Suite 1805, under the name Ryan Reed." The clerk opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again, unsure what to say. His fingers moved nervously over the computer keyboard. He stammered something incoherent about hotel policy and guest privacy. Caroline just looked at him, waiting, without losing her composure. It was then that Mr. Brooks appeared. The hotel manager was a man of about 60 with perfectly coiffed gray hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and decades of experience handling delicate situations. He approached discreetly, placing a reassuring hand on the young clerk's shoulder. In a soft but professional voice, he said, "Mrs. Reed, I'm not sure it would be appropriate for." Caroline interrupted him with a gentleness that made it clear she was not open to negotiation. "Mr. Brooks," she said, maintaining eye contact, "don't worry, I'm not here to make a scene. I'm not going to shout or cause a disturbance. I just need to deliver this envelope. She held up the sealed manila envelope, the Reed Global logo clearly visible. It's an urgent corporate matter that cannot wait until morning. I'm sure you understand. Mr. Brooks studied Caroline carefully. There was something in her calm, in her posture, in the way she held that envelope that told him this woman had everything under control. She was not a hysterical wife on the verge of exploding. She was a professional executing a plan. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded slowly. "Very well, Mrs. Reed. Allow me to escort you." He motioned for the young clerk to stay put and then indicated for Caroline to follow him to the elevators. They walked together across the elegant hotel lobby. Mr. Brooks asked no questions, and Caroline was grateful for his discretion. When they reached the elevator, he pressed the button for the 18th floor. The doors opened with a soft mechanical chime, and they both stepped inside. The enclosed space was lit by soft lights. There was a mirror on the back wall where Caroline could see her own reflection. She looked strong, determined, ready. Mr. Brooks stood silently beside her, hands clasped in front of him, maintaining his impeccable professionalism. As the elevator ascended, Caroline felt each floor like a beat of her own heart. Floor 5, Floor 8, Floor 11. Each number that lit up on the panel was a reminder of all the years she had invested in a marriage that turned out to be a lie. 12 years of trust, 12 years of loyalty, 12 years of building something together, only to discover that while she was giving everything, Ryan was taking everything for himself, the money, the company, her dignity, and now his time and his body with another woman. But each passing floor was also a reminder of her own strength. She had survived the discovery, she had survived the pain, and she had turned that pain into a perfect plan. She hadn't come to cry or beg. She had come to collect justice, and that justice was sealed inside the envelope she held in her right hand. Floor 16, Floor 17, Floor 18. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Caroline stepped forward onto the carpeted hallway. The corridor was long and quiet, lit by wall sconces that created an intimate, discreet atmosphere, the kind of atmosphere perfect for secrets, the kind of atmosphere where betrayals flourished without witnesses. But tonight, Caroline was the witness, and she was also the judge. She walked down the hall with steady steps, Mr. Brooks following at a respectful distance. Caroline counted the suite numbers as she went. 1,801, 1,803, and finally, there it was. Suite 1805. She stopped in front of the door, and for a moment, just a brief moment, she felt her determination waver. Behind that door was the man she had married, the man she had loved, the man who had promised to be faithful until death do they part. And next to him was the woman who had pretended to be her friend while stabbing her in the back. But Caroline closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered all the lies. All the nights Ryan had come home late with fabricated excuses, all the times Brooke had hugged her with that fake smile, all the money Ryan had stolen from the company she helped build. And when she opened her eyes again, there was no doubt, only clarity. From inside the suite, Caroline could hear voices, laughter, the unmistakable sound of glasses clinking in a toast, and soft music in the background. They sounded happy. They sounded like two people who believed their secret was safe, that no one would discover them, that they could continue playing this dangerous game without consequences. Caroline felt a pang in her chest, but ignored it. There was no more room for pain, only for action. She raised her right hand and knocked on the door once, a firm, clear knock impossible to ignore. The laughter stopped immediately. There was a heavy, tense silence. Caroline could imagine the scene on the other side. Ryan and Brooke looking at each other in confusion, wondering who it could be, probably thinking it was room service or maybe the manager with a message. Never in their worst nightmares would they imagine it was her. Then Ryan's voice came from inside, carefree and relaxed, without the slightest suspicion of what was about to happen. "Room service?" he asked with that casual tone Caroline knew so well. The same tone he used when talking to clients, when closing deals, when lying with a smile on his face. Caroline felt her lips curve into a cold smile. She replied in a clear, controlled voice, each word loaded with a meaning that only she understood at that moment. something like that. Footsteps approached the door from inside the suite, the sound of the lock turning, and then the door opened. Ryan's face appeared in the doorway, still with a smile on his lips, probably expecting to see a hotel employee. But when his eyes met Caroline's, that smile froze. It vanished completely. His expression shifted from surprise to confusion, and then to absolute terror. The color drained from his face as if someone had opened a valve. His eyes widened so much they looked like they might pop out of their sockets. "Caroline?" he whispered, his voice sounding like someone who had just seen a ghost. Behind him, Caroline could see Brooke, wrapped in a white hotel sheet, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her eyes also widened in horror when she saw who was at the door. She brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The scene was almost comical in its pathetic theatricality. The two lovers discovered, caught in their lie, with nowhere to hide. Caroline said nothing for a moment. She just observed them. She observed Ryan in his hotel bathrobe. She observed Brooke with her smeared makeup and disheveled hair. She observed the champagne glasses on the nightstand. She observed the clothes strewn on the floor, and she felt nothing. Not pain, not rage, not even satisfaction. Just an absolute calm, because this didn't matter to her anymore. This marriage was already dead, and she had come to officially bury it. With a slow, deliberate movement, Caroline extended her right hand, offering the sealed manila envelope to Ryan. "It's all in here, Ryan," she said, her voice so cold it could have frozen the air between them. "What you wanted so badly." Ryan stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. His hands were visibly shaking as he took it. "What is this, Caroline?" His voice was no longer that of the self-assured executive who closed multi-million-dollar deals. It was the voice of a man who knew, deep down, that he had made a fatal mistake, one he couldn't recover from. Caroline smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of someone who had won a game the other person didn't even know they were playing. "Your resignation letter," she answered with devastating calm. "Signed by the board of directors this afternoon." Ryan's fingers fumbled as he broke the seal. He pulled out the documents with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and Caroline saw the exact moment reality hit him. His face, already pale, lost its last trace of color. His lips moved as he read, but no sound came out. Page after page, the truth was revealed. The notification of his immediate termination, the transfer of all his corporate shares to Caroline Reed's name, and worst of all, the complete audit report exposing every one of his embezzled funds, every illegal transfer, every forged signature, every stolen cent. "While you were playing the great seducer," Caroline said, her voice so quiet it made the message even more terrifying, "I was auditing the accounts. We found everything, Ryan. Every dollar you siphoned off, every document you falsified, every illegal transaction you authorized." She paused, letting each word sink in like a knife. "And guess who signed all those illegal transfers? You. Your name, your digital signature, all traceable directly to you." Ryan looked up from the documents, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Caroline could see the panic in his eyes, the desperation of someone who suddenly realizes they've lost everything, their job, their money, their reputation, their future, all destroyed in a single moment. Behind him, Brooke had started to cry, her ragged sobs filling the uncomfortable silence of the suite. She got up from the bed, clutching the sheet that covered her, and walked toward where Caroline and Ryan stood. "Caroline," she pleaded, her voice broken. "I didn't know anything about that, I swear. I didn't know he was stealing money. We just... Caroline turned to look at her, and the coldness in her eyes made Brooke stop mid-sentence. "You're not off the hook either, Brooke," Caroline said with a calmness more frightening than any scream. "The company's legal department will be expecting your statement first thing tomorrow morning. You'll have to explain whether you knew about the financial irregularities. And if you'd prefer to avoid that awkward conversation, I can always send this video of the suite to Human Resources." Caroline took her phone out of her purse and turned it so they both could see the screen. There it was, playing on a silent loop, recordings of Ryan and Brooke entering the hotel, kissing in the elevator, walking hand in hand down the hallway. The footage was dated with irrefutable timestamps, the private investigators' work, documenting every encounter, every lie, every stolen moment they thought was secret. Brooke completely fell apart. Her legs gave out, and she sank to her knees on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please," she begged between tears. "Please, Caroline, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't think." But her words were lost in her sobs. She was no longer the self-assured woman who walked the office halls in high heels and fake smiles. She was just a broken person facing the consequences of her actions. Ryan finally reacted. He dropped the documents to the floor and took a step toward Caroline. "Wait," he said, desperation now in his voice. "Wait, Caroline, we can fix this. We can talk. Please, just give me a chance to explain." Caroline took a step back, moving away from him as if his very presence contaminated her. The expression on her face was one of pure disgust. "There's nothing to fix," she replied with a firmness that left no room for negotiation. "You lost everything, Ryan. Your position at the company, your shares, your reputation, your marriage, everything." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "And believe me when I tell you that the lawyers will personally ensure you face all the legal consequences for corporate fraud. $250,000 in embezzled funds doesn't just disappear without someone paying for it." Ryan stared at her with an expression of absolute horror. "Caroline, please. I was an idiot, I admit it, but you can't destroy my life like this. Think about everything we built together. Think about—" "What should I think about?" Caroline cut him off, and for the first time that night, there was a spark of real emotion in her voice. It wasn't sadness, it was contained rage, years of betrayed trust finally finding its voice. "About the 12 years I wasted trusting you? About all the nights I asked if everything was okay and you lied to my face? About every time she pointed at Brooke, hugged me and asked about my marriage while she was sleeping with my husband?" Caroline took a deep breath, regaining her composure. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. "No, Ryan, I've done enough thinking, and I've decided I deserve better than a thief and a liar." She turned toward the elevator, where Mr. Brooks had witnessed the entire scene with professional discretion. Before walking away completely, Caroline turned back one last time. "Oh, and Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice having regained its icy calm, "the bill for the suite is on Mr. Reed. After all, he can still afford it with his severance package, if there's anything left after the lawyers are done with him." Caroline walked to the elevator without looking back. She could hear Brooke crying hysterically and Ryan trying to say something else, but she no longer cared. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. Mr. Brooks followed, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors began to close, Caroline had one last glimpse of Ryan standing in the hallway, holding the documents that had just destroyed his life, with Brooke kneeling on the floor behind him. And then the doors shut completely. The elevator began its silent descent. Caroline finally exhaled, a long sigh that seemed to release years of accumulated tension. She didn't feel the immediate triumph she had expected. She didn't feel the explosive satisfaction of revenge fulfilled. What she felt was something much deeper and more significant. She felt liberated. She felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She felt for the first time in weeks that she could breathe fully. "Mr. Brooks watched her discreetly from his corner of the elevator. After a moment, he spoke in a soft voice. "Mrs. Reed, if I may say so, you handled that situation with extraordinary grace." Caroline looked at him and smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks, and thank you for your discretion tonight. It won't be forgotten." He nodded. "It's part of my job, ma'am, though I must admit, in 30 years of managing this hotel, I've never seen anything handled with such dignity." The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Caroline walked out with the same elegance she had walked in with. The same doorman opened the door for her, and she stepped out into the cool Manhattan night. A taxi was passing right then, and she raised her hand to hail it. As she got into the car and gave the driver her apartment address, Caroline looked back one last time at the Empire Grand Hotel. Up there, on the 18th floor, in Suite 1805, two people were probably still trying to comprehend how their lives had just changed forever. But Caroline was no longer thinking about them. They were not her problem anymore. They were her past. And as the taxi pulled away from the hotel, heading into the bright lights of the city that never sleeps, Caroline Reed felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt that her future, finally, belonged only to her. 3 months after that night that changed everything, Caroline Reed walked through the glass-walled hallways of Reed Global's headquarters with a confidence that radiated from her very core. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with a firm, steady rhythm. Employees passing by greeted her with genuine respect, some even with admiration. She was no longer just the brilliant financial consultant everyone knew. She was now the chief executive officer, the CEO, the woman who had saved the company from a financial and ethical collapse that would have destroyed everything they had built. The glass walls of the offices reflected her image as she walked. Caroline paused for a moment in front of one and observed her reflection. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had stood in front of her bathroom mirror 3 months ago, crying on the floor, feeling her world fall apart. This woman was stronger, more confident, freer. She wore a dark gray pantsuit that fit her perfectly. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and in her eyes was a determination that hadn't been there before. It was not the determination born of naivety or blind trust. It was the determination of someone who had walked through fire and emerged on the other side, not just surviving, but transformed. The board of directors had unanimously appointed her CEO just 2 weeks after the confrontation at the hotel. The vote had been swift and without objection. Mr. Thompson had been the first to propose her name, arguing that Caroline not only had the necessary financial skills, but had also demonstrated a courage and integrity that few leaders possessed. Mrs. Chen had seconded the motion, adding that the way Caroline handled the situation had saved the company from a devastating public scandal. Dr. Reyes had simply nodded, saying it was the most obvious decision the board had made in years. Caroline had accepted the position with gratitude but without false modesty. She knew she deserved it. She knew she had worked for it for 12 years, though she never imagined it would come this way. And from her first day as CEO, she had worked tirelessly to restructure the company and restore the credibility that Ryan had jeopardized. The first thing she did was hire a team of external auditors to review every account, every transaction, every document from the past 5 years. She wanted to ensure there were no more hidden surprises. She wanted to know exactly how much damage Ryan had done and how to fix it. The auditors worked for weeks, and while they found a few additional minor irregularities, they confirmed that the bulk of the fraud had been identified. The $250,000 that was siphoned off was traced and recovered from the offshore accounts. Some funds had to be negotiated with international lawyers, but in the end, almost all of it was returned to the company. Then, Caroline implemented new transparency protocols that revolutionized how Reed Global operated. She established a dual signature system for all transactions over $10,000. She created an independent ethics committee that reported directly to the board. She implemented mandatory quarterly audits and, most importantly, cultivated a culture of honesty where employees felt safe reporting any irregularities without fear of reprisal. The company's transformation did not go unnoticed in the industry. Articles in trade magazines praised Caroline's leadership. Other CEOs called her for advice on how to implement similar measures in their own companies. Reed Global was becoming an example of what it meant to do business with integrity, and Caroline was the face of that transformation. But it hadn't all been easy. There were nights Caroline stayed at the office past midnight, reviewing numbers, signing documents, making tough decisions. There were moments she missed the simplicity of being just a consultant, without the burden of running an entire company. But whenever she felt the weight of leadership, she remembered why she was there. She remembered the betrayal, she remembered the pain, and she remembered the promise she had made to herself. Never again would she be a victim of someone else's decisions. Ryan, for his part, had fallen as low as Caroline had predicted. The legal proceedings began 2 weeks after his termination. The New York State Attorney's Office filed formal charges of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The evidence Caroline had meticulously gathered was irrefutable. Documents signed by him, transfers authorized under his name, emails where he discussed the diversions with contacts at offshore banks. It was all there, chronologically ordered, presented in a way that no lawyer, no matter how talented, could refute. Ryan had hired one of the city's top criminal defense firms, spending what was left of his personal savings on lawyers who charged $1,000 an hour. They tried to negotiate a plea deal, offering to return all the money in exchange for reduced charges. But the prosecution, seeing the mountain of evidence and the clarity of the case, refused. They wanted to make an example of him. They wanted to show that even executives in expensive suits face consequences when they commit crimes. The trial took place the previous month. Caroline did not attend any of the hearings. She didn't need to see him. She didn't need to hear his excuses or his attempts to justify what he had done, but her lawyer sent her regular updates. He told her how Ryan had tried to blame subordinates, claiming he just signed what was put in front of him. He told her how the prosecutor had torn that defense apart by showing emails where Ryan specifically instructed how to move the money. He told her how the jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding him guilty on all counts. The sentence was handed down last week: 5 years in federal prison, full restitution of the funds, and the likely permanent destruction of his professional reputation. When Caroline received the news, she was in her office reviewing the quarterly earnings report. She read her lawyer's text, nodded once, and put her phone away. She felt no joy at Ryan's misfortune, but she felt no pity either. She simply felt that justice had run its course. Brooke Miller had vanished from the corporate world as if she had never existed. After her immediate dismissal from Reed Global, she had tried to find work at other communications firms, but news of the scandal, though discreetly handled, had circulated in Manhattan's professional circles. No one wanted to hire the woman who had been complicit in destroying a marriage and had possibly been involved in corporate fraud. It didn't matter that she hadn't been charged with a crime. Her association with Ryan was enough to tarnish her. Caroline had heard rumors that Brooke had left New York, probably returning to her hometown somewhere in the South. Her social media profiles, once filled with photos of expensive restaurants, designer bags, and exotic vacation selfies, were now private or deleted. She had sent several messages to Caroline in the weeks following the scandal, long, rambling messages full of desperate apologies, convoluted explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. Caroline never replied to a single one. Eventually, the messages stopped, and Caroline never thought of her again. Some people just weren't worth a second of her time or energy. One Wednesday afternoon, as Caroline was reviewing financial reports in her new executive office, her assistant knocked softly on the door. It was Monica, an efficient young professional who had been promoted to the position after Caroline became CEO. "Miss Reed," she said with her usual professionalism, "you have an interview scheduled in 15 minutes with Business Weekly. The reporter has arrived and is waiting in the conference room." Caroline nodded, placed the documents she was reviewing in a folder, and stood up. She smoothed her suit and walked toward the conference room. The reporter was a young man, probably in his early 30s, with a notepad in one hand and a coffee in the other. He stood up quickly when Caroline entered, extending his hand with a nervous smile. "Miss Reed, it's an honor to meet you. I'm David Mendoza from Business Weekly. Thank you for taking the time for this interview." Caroline shook his hand and gestured for him to sit. "The pleasure is mine, David. How can I help you?" The interview began with standard questions about the company's future, the new protocols she had implemented, the growth projections for the next year. Caroline answered with the precision of someone who knew every number, every metric, every detail of her company. But she knew the inevitable question would eventually come, and it did. David set his pen down on his notepad and looked at Caroline with genuine curiosity. "Miss Reed, if I may be direct, the entire industry knows the story of how you came to this position. The way you uncovered the fraud, how you handled a devastating personal situation with such control and professionalism. I have to ask, what did it feel like to confront your husband's betrayal with such elegance?" Caroline knew this question was coming. She had anticipated it, and she had the answer ready not because she had rehearsed it, but because she had lived it. She set her own pen on the desk, leaned back slightly in her chair, and looked at David with a calm expression. "Betrayal is like a bad investment," she began, her voice clear and steady. "You lose when you react with emotion, but you win when you respond with strategy." David was writing furiously in his notepad, clearly impressed by the answer. Caroline continued, because there was more to say. "Look, David, I learned something important during those difficult months. I learned that pain is inevitable. You can't avoid it. When someone you love betrays you, it hurts. There's no way around that pain." She paused for emphasis. "But destruction is optional. You can choose to destroy yourself with that pain, let it consume you, let it turn you into a bitter, broken version of who you were. Or you can choose to rebuild." "And you chose to rebuild?" David asked, completely absorbed in the conversation. Caroline smiled. "I chose not to lose myself in the process of losing someone else. I chose to remember who I was before that marriage and who I wanted to be after. I chose to turn pain into power and betrayal into transformation." She leaned forward slightly. "And that, David, is what I want people to understand, especially the women who read your magazine. When someone betrays you, it's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your own value." The interview continued for another 20 minutes, but Caroline knew that quote would be the one to appear in the article's headline, and it was. 2 weeks later, when the magazine was published, the cover featured a professional photo of Caroline in her office with the headline, "Betrayal is like a bad investment, the CEO who turned pain into power." That evening, after the magazine was released, Caroline left the office earlier than usual. It was just 6 p.m. as she walked through the streets of Manhattan. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The streets were bustling with people leaving work, rushing for the subway, heading to restaurants for dinner. The city vibrated with that unique energy that only New York had. Caroline walked without a specific destination, simply enjoying the fresh air and the freedom of not having to rush anywhere. At some point, without consciously planning it, she found herself in front of the Empire Grand Hotel. She stopped on the sidewalk, looking up at the building that had been the stage for one of the most pivotal moments of her life. She glanced up toward the 18th floor, to where she knew Suite 1805 was. She waited to feel something: pain, perhaps, or rage, or even vengeful satisfaction, but all she felt was a deep calm and an unexpected gratitude. Gratitude, because that night, 3 months ago, had marked the end of a lie and the beginning of a truth. Gratitude, because Ryan's betrayal had freed her from a marriage that was never real. Gratitude, because she had discovered a strength within herself she never knew she possessed. And gratitude, because now, for the first time in 12 years, her life belonged completely to her. Caroline continued walking, leaving the hotel behind. Her phone vibrated in her purse. She took it out and saw a text from her lawyer, all signed and processed. "The divorce is official. Congratulations, Caroline. You are officially a free woman." She read the message twice, smiled faintly, and put the phone away without replying. There was nothing to say. It wasn't something to celebrate with champagne or mourn with tears. It was simply the official closing of a chapter she had already closed emotionally long ago. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at Caroline's office. Monica handed it to her with the rest of the day's mail. Caroline immediately noticed it had no return address, but she recognized the handwriting on the front. It was Ryan's. For a moment, she considered throwing it away unopened. What could he possibly say to her now that was worth reading? But curiosity won. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. In the center, written in the same hand that used to write her love notes years ago, was a simple phrase, "You won." Caroline read the 2 words several times. Then she calmly folded the paper and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk. She didn't throw it away. She didn't destroy it. She simply kept it as a reminder of what she had overcome. She stood up from her chair and walked to her office window, which overlooked the entire city of Manhattan. The building stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of concrete and glass shimmering in the afternoon sunday. "I didn't win, Ryan," she whispered to herself, knowing he would never hear these words, but needing to say them anyway. "I just stopped losing." And in that moment, standing before that window with the whole city at her feet, Caroline Reed understood the most important lesson of her life. She understood that sometimes losing the wrong people isn't a loss at all. It's a gain. It's the only way to win yourself back, to reclaim the space those people unjustly occupied in your life, to discover who you really are when you're not defined by your relationship with someone else. The following months passed in a whirlwind of work and growth. Reed Global achieved record profit numbers. Caroline was nominated for several business leadership awards. Her story began to circulate not as scandalous gossip, but as an inspiring tale of resilience and transformation. And with each success, with each recognition, Caroline felt herself moving further and further away from the woman she had been, and closer to the woman she was always meant to be. She was invited to speak at a conference for women business leaders to be held at the Manhattan Convention Center. The event would bring together hundreds of female entrepreneurs, executives, and professionals from all industries. Caroline accepted the invitation, though speaking publicly about personal matters wasn't natural for her, but she felt a responsibility. If her story could help even one woman find her own strength, it was worth sharing. On the day of the conference, Caroline arrived at the convention center an hour early. She reviewed her presentation in a private room, practiced key lines, and made sure her microphone worked properly. When she finally took the stage in front of an audience of over 500 women, she felt a moment of nervousness. But when she looked at all those faces watching her with expectation, the nervousness transformed into determination. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice resonating clearly through the speakers. "My name is Caroline Reed, and I'm here to talk to you about something we will all face at some point in our lives: betrayal." She paused, letting the words settle in the room. "There was a time in my life, not long ago, when I thought I was going to lose everything. I lost a marriage that had lasted 12 years. I lost trust in someone who had been my partner in everything. I lost the image of the perfect life I had so carefully constructed, and for a moment, a very brief moment, I thought I was going to lose myself, too." Caroline could see some women in the audience nodding, recognizing that feeling in their own lives. She continued, "But here's what I learned. You can lose many things in life. You can lose jobs, you can lose money, you can lose relationships. But the one thing you can never afford to lose is yourself. Because at the end of the day, you are all you truly have. Your strength, your integrity, your value, no one can take that from you unless you let them." The room was completely silent, every woman hanging on her every word. Caroline spoke for 20 more minutes, sharing not just her story, but the lessons she had learned. She talked about how pain is inevitable, but the response to pain is a choice. She talked about how betrayal can either destroy you or transform you, depending on what you decide to do with it. She talked about the importance of maintaining your dignity even when others lose theirs, and she talked about the power that comes from reclaiming your own life. When she finished, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then, one woman stood up, then another, and within seconds the entire audience was on its feet, applauding. Some women were crying openly, others were smiling with the expression of someone who has just understood something important. Caroline looked out at all of them and knew, deep in her soul, that her story had touched something real in them. Not because it was a perfect story of revenge fulfilled, but because it was an honest story of falling and rising again. After her presentation, as Caroline was preparing to leave the convention center, a young woman approached her. She was probably in her early 30s, professionally dressed, but with eyes red from crying. "Miss Reed," she said, her voice trembling, "I needed to thank you. My husband cheated on me 6 months ago. I've been lost ever since. I didn't know how to move on. I thought my life was over, that I wasn't enough, that I had done something wrong." Caroline took the woman's hands firmly, looking her directly in the eye. "Listen to me very carefully," she said with an intensity that captured the woman's full attention. "Your life doesn't end when someone betrays you. Your life begins when you decide you deserve better, and you did nothing wrong. Other people's choices are not a reflection of your worth, they are a reflection of their character." The woman began to cry again, but this time they were different tears, tears of relief, of release. She hugged Caroline briefly and thanked her once more before walking away. Caroline watched her go and felt something warm in her chest. This was the true legacy of her story. Not the CEO position, not the recovered money, not the justice served, but the power to help another woman find her own strength. That night, Caroline returned to her apartment, poured herself a glass of red wine, took off her shoes, and stepped out onto her balcony. The city stretched out before her, a million lights twinkling in the darkness. She thought of Ryan, sitting in a prison cell, paying for his crimes. She thought of Brooke, hiding somewhere far from Manhattan, living with the consequences of her choices. She thought of all the years she had invested in a false marriage. And then she thought of everything she had gained by losing them. She had gained her own company, she had gained the respect of her colleagues, she had gained a platform to inspire other women. But more importantly than all of that, she had gained something priceless. She had gained herself back. She had reclaimed her power, her voice, her life. And no one could ever take that away from her again. Caroline raised her wineglass to the night sky, to the stars barely visible between the city lights. She made a silent toast, not to revenge, though justice had been served. Not to success, though she had achieved it. She toasted to herself, to the woman she was before Ryan, full of dreams and ambition, to the woman she was during the marriage, trusting and building, to the woman she was during the betrayal, broken but not destroyed, and especially to the woman she was now, free, powerful, unstoppable. Because this wasn't the end of her story, not even the end of a chapter. It was simply the closing of an old book and the beginning of a completely new one. A book where she would be the author, the protagonist, and the hero. A book where every decision would be hers, every path would be chosen by her, every victory would be the result of her own strength. As the city glowed before her and the cool night wind caressed her face, Caroline Reed smiled, a genuine smile, full of peace and certainty. Because she had learned the most important lesson any woman can learn, that you are stronger than you think, more valuable than you have been led to believe, and more capable of rebuilding yourself than you ever imagined. And that lesson, that profound truth, no one could ever take from her. It was hers forever. There are moments in life when the ground we thought was solid opens up beneath our feet. Moments when the people we trusted most show us we never really knew them. And in those dark moments, we face a crucial decision that will define the rest of our lives. We can let betrayal destroy us, or we can use that pain as the fuel that propels us toward our best selves. Caroline's story teaches us a profound truth we often forget. Your value was never defined by someone else's loyalty. You are not less because someone chose to betray you. You did not fail because someone else failed to value you. The mistakes of others are not a reflection of your inadequacy, they are a reflection of their character. When someone cheats on you, steals from you, lies to you, or betrays you, that person is showing you who they truly are, not who you are. Caroline could have chosen the path of drama and emotional destruction. She could have made a public scene. She could have screamed and cried in front of everyone. She could have allowed bitterness to consume her completely, but she chose something more powerful. She chose strategy over emotion. She chose dignity over scandal. She chose to become the judge of her own life instead of remaining a victim of others' decisions. And here is the most important lesson. Pain is inevitable when you are betrayed, but destruction is optional. You cannot avoid feeling the blow when you discover your life was a lie. You cannot avoid the nights of tears and the unanswered questions, but you can choose what you do with that pain. You can let it rot inside you until it makes you bitter and robs you of your ability to trust again, or you can transform it. You can use that pain as the hammer that shatters the chains, binding you to a false version of yourself. Caroline understood something that many people take years to grasp. Sometimes, losing the wrong people isn't a loss, it's a liberation. When someone leaves your life, or when you decide it's time for them to go, you are not losing anything real. You are gaining space. Space to breathe, space to grow, space to become who you were truly meant to be, without the limitations that person imposed on you. Caroline's true victory was not destroying Ryan's career, it was not seeing him face legal consequences, it was not taking over the company. The true victory was reclaiming herself. It was realizing that for 12 years she had built her identity around a marriage that was never real, and that now she had the chance to build an identity based entirely on her own strength, her own values, her own power. When you face your own betrayal, because sooner or later we all face some form of it, remember this: your reaction will define your future more than the action of the person who betrayed you. You can choose to be the permanent victim of that story, or you can choose to be the hero who rises stronger. You can choose to stay stuck in why me, or you can move toward what's next. Justice doesn't always mean revenge. Sometimes, justice is simply making sure the people who hurt you can no longer do so. Sometimes, it's taking back what is rightfully yours. Sometimes, it's simply locking that door and throwing away the key. And always, always, the greatest justice is becoming a version of yourself so powerful, so confident, so complete, that the person who betrayed you realizes they lost the best thing they ever had. Caroline didn't win when Ryan went to prison. Caroline won when she looked in the mirror and no longer saw the betrayed wife. She won when she stopped defining herself by what she had lost and started celebrating what she had gained. She won when her story stopped being about him and started being entirely about her. So, if you are going through your own dark night of the soul, if someone has betrayed you, if you feel your world has collapsed, remember Caroline's story. Remember that the pain you feel now is temporary, but the strength you build from it can be permanent. Remember that your worth never depended on someone else's loyalty. Remember that sometimes you have to lose the wrong people to find yourself. And above all, remember this: you didn't lose when someone betrayed you. You simply stopped losing your time, your energy, and your life on someone who didn't deserve it. And that isn't a defeat. That is the beginning of your true victory. If you like this story, leave a comment and tell us what country you're watching from. It's very important to us.